We also have lots of new tutors that are not so familiar with it. So I'm going to give like a brief rundown of how to administer the DIBELS and how to find all of the materials that you'll need in order to administer it the best that you can. I also want to acknowledge that most of our tutors work virtually, even though some of our tutors are also working in person. So I'm going to try to make general statements that can apply to either administration of it. DIBELS, I'll show you, also has some remote administration guidelines that you have access to as well. All right, so we're going to jump right in. I am going to ask that you put yourself on mute before we jump in, just so we have a nice clear recording. Another thing I want to say before we get started is that I'm not going to stop throughout the presentation to answer questions, just because we're recording this and brevity will be important, even though I said we could probably do a whole day PD around the DIBELS if we really want to dig into it. So this is just a very basic introduction of how to administer it. But I am going to stick around at the end of our session to answer questions, and I can also make myself available to meet individually if you would like to as well. All right, so we're going to jump right in. I'm going to talk to everybody about what is the DIBELS and why we administer it first. So most of us use the Wilson Reading System for our instruction, and it has wonderful progress monitoring built into the program itself. However, reading aloud needs data to measure the growth of our students, to track their progress, to measure the success of our organization, and also information to attract possible donors to continually to financially assist our organization. Those are kind of the three big reasons of why we do the DIBELS. I think for all of our purposes, because we're instructors, that tracking student progress is very important. I think keeping in the back of our mind what grade level expectations are is very important, but I do want to highlight and emphasize that that might not be in the purview of many of the students that we serve due to the nature of their disability or their difficulties with reading. So I do understand that some of these tests might be outside what your student is currently able to do, but it gives us a good measure of how we can what we're shooting for kind of long term, how we want to track growth, what grade compared to their more typically developing peers. So what is the DIBELS? I'm going to give you kind of like the definition from the program. The DIBELS stands for Dynamic Indicators for Basic Early Literacy Skills, and it's a set of procedures and measures for assessing the acquisition of literacy skills. They are designed to be short, 1-minute fluency measures that can be used to regularly detect and monitor the development of early literacy and basic reading skills in kindergarten through 8th grade. DIBELS was developed to measure, recognize, empirically validated skills related to the general reading outcomes. Each subtest has been thoroughly researched and demonstrated to be a reliable and valid indicator of early literacy development. When implemented as recommended, DIBELS results can be used to evaluate individual students' development, as well as provide grade level feedback towards validated instructional objectives. I really like that definition because I think it highlights that this is a valid assessment, and it's another reason why we chose this really wonderful assessment that is easy to administer and has been replicated across thousands of students across the United States. I really, really like this assessment. All right, so now I'm going to go into my presentation and share with you more about what the DIBELS is. Okay, going to see my script. All right. All right, everybody. So my name is Katie McShane. All right, so today I want to give an overview of the DIBELS assessment. I'm going to talk about the administration timeline that you'll be expected to fulfill. And then I'm going to go through the individual subtests and teach you how to administer appropriately. All right, so in reading aloud, we'll be doing the DIBELS. There are benchmarks and there are progress monitoring tools. So kind of they're the same, test the same skills, but they're done at different frequencies. So the benchmarks are done 3 times a year, at the beginning, the middle, and end of the school year. And then there's the progress monitoring probes that can be given about every 6 weeks. We're trying to get into the habit of re-administering it. Kind of gives you an idea of how your child is progressing towards benchmark standards with the progress monitoring probes. But what's really, really crucial is that we have the benchmark data, because when we look at growth over time, we absolutely need the beginning of the year and the end of year to measure things like zones of growth that I'm not going to get into in this presentation, but it's a really valuable tool that we can use to measure growth on an individual basis instead of, is this child meeting benchmark standards or not? But it's just another tool that we look at when we look at the growth of our students. All right. Here are the different DIBELS subtests that your students, that you'll be administering for your students. There is letter naming fluency. Excuse me. I'm gonna sneeze. All right. Then there's phoneme segmentation fluency, nonsense word fluency, or word reading fluency, oral reading fluency, and the maze. Not every subtest is given to different students. I'm going to show you on the next slide at what grade level that you give these different subtests. As you can see with the repetition of fluency, DIBELS is a fluency assessment. So it's really looking for that automaticity of and accuracy of basic literacy skills. All right. Here is the testing administration timeline. And if you look across the bottom here, it has the different grades and the times of the year for administration, kindergarten through 8th grade. These bars up here tell us which subtests need to be administered for the different grades. So if we look at a first grader in the beginning of the year, they would be administered letter naming fluency, phoneme segmentation fluency, nonsense word fluency, word reading fluency, and oral reading fluency. First grade has the most amount of subtests administered out of all of the grades. But if we look over here at a third grader in the beginning of the year, they would be administered nonsense word fluency, word reading fluency, oral reading fluency, and the maze. I have this presented in a different format that we'll look at in a little bit. So this information is given across many different documents, and I can also answer questions if you're not sure which assessment you should be administering. One thing I do want to highlight that's a little outside of what's recommended through DIBELS is that every reading aloud student is asked to be administered the nonsense word fluency. We do that because of the nature of the students that we work with. They struggle with reading and we want to measure their phonics skills. So we are asking that all students are administered the nonsense word fluency. If you're working with a student who may be a 5th grader, and you're not sure which nonsense word fluency to administer, you're going to administer that 3rd grade nonsense word fluency assessment. Unfortunately, we don't have benchmarks scores for those students. So it's something that we're kind of just keeping tabs on, kind of off the record of the benchmark process, because we don't have those scores to measure to. But we can still look at, like, are they reading more correct letter sounds? Are they increasing their fluency? So there's a lot of good information we can gain from that, even if they might not have benchmark scores that we can relate to. All right, I have created a document for all of us to have access to testing materials. Wonderfully, DIBELS has given all of their testing materials free online. So I just kind of organized all of that information into a Word document for all of our tutors to have access to. So I'm going to pull that up now and show you what that looks like. So it's always attached in what Liz sends to everybody when they're going to be asked to do these assessments that I'll talk about in a moment. But it's just called Access to Testing Materials. And it looks like this. So here you're going to see information about which test to administer based on the grade of your student. And it just lists here what assessments you should give. Scroll down. Here, I have links to the DIBELS website. So if you ever want to check that out on your own. Also, it'll link directly to the administration and scoring guide, and also some remote testing administration directions. If you are testing your student remotely, gives you some tips and tricks here. And then if you scroll down, it has benchmarks and for each of the different grades. So this is where you're actually able to print out student materials and teacher materials. So when you click on one of these, it's going to download as a direct link to your computer. Let me reshare my whole screen. All right, so I should have just reshared my whole screen. So when I download this link, you should be able to see it. So I'm going to click on kindergarten here. And down here, it is downloading as a direct link to my computer. So if I click on that, it's going to open up in another file folder. I hope everybody can see. And it's titled DIBELS 8 Benchmark K. When I click on that, it has two different materials in here. I have the scoring materials for the teacher, and I have the student materials, what you'd be presenting to your student. So from that, I can click on scoring, and it's going to go right to my internet browser again. And now I have all of the benchmark materials that I would need to administer the assessment for my students. DIBELS makes it really nice. The DIBELS 8th edition makes it very nice and easy to access all of their materials. So that's how you're going to find the benchmark materials. The progress monitoring materials are the same exact thing. They look a little different though, because the benchmark materials, you just have one document because beginning, middle, and end are all found right there. But for progress monitoring, you just have a little bit more. So it has the different subtests. So NWF, nonsense word fluency, PSF, phoneme segmentation fluency, word reading fluency, and it has the scoring and the student materials. So if I just click, say this is kindergarten nonsense word fluency, progress monitoring, it has the first page, and these are student materials, and there's 22 different progress monitoring probes, or about 20 progress monitoring probes. So you're definitely not going to ever run out of probes for progress monitoring. There's even more if you'd like to administer them more often, but you're not required to do that. We do it about every 6 weeks. Sometimes schools really like that information, or families really like that information to see how their child is kind of measuring up to the benchmark standard or their peers. So that was a quick rundown of where to access the testing materials so you can administer the tests. Then I want to talk to you about how reading aloud is going to communicate. So our wonderful administrative assistant, Liz, is going to be your kind of point of contact around the DIBELS administration. So she will send you an email that has links to all the materials that you'll need. It'll also have the dates that you'll have to complete the DIBELS by. So Liz will send you an email, and it will give you links, and then it will tell you, please have your beginning of the year benchmarks done by September 30th, which I think is when we're asking the beginning of the year benchmarks to be done. And she'll kind of give you a window of, like, you know, from the time of her email all the way up until the 30th. And then she will kind of follow up with you in case you did miss the deadline, to kind of just ask you like some questions to make sure that that is complete. Then you as the instructor will be asked to complete the test by that date, and you will upload that information into your data tracker. In a moment, I'm going to show you where to find your data tracker. And we all have new data trackers for the new school year, 2022 to 2023. And it would be named 2022 to 2023, your name data tracker. So you're going to put your data that you collected from your testing administration into that digital folder. And then Liz goes into that document and uploads all of that information to the DIBELS system. Then we'll do our best to share those graphs that we can produce with that information with you after the administration. This is very difficult work on Liz's side because we do service 170 students. So imagine that's 170 people's data that she has to input into the system. So Liz is so wonderful, and we're so thankful that she can do that. All right. All right, let's take a look really quick at the data tracker and where you're going to find that. For returning tutors, it's going to be in the same place in your student updates. So it should be right there. Liz has created brand new ones, and we made sure that they were in your folders, and they should be there now. So for newer tutors, I'm going to show you. Mine looks a little bit different because I kind of have everybody's access to everybody's, but it's going to be under your shared with me folder in your Google Drive. So you're going to go to shared with me, and it's going to be titled Student Updates and Your Name. I'm going to show you mine. These are all of our wonderful tutors. Okay. So this is what your student updates folder will look like. You can see my students are up here, and in there they have their student documentation, their tutoring notes. I'll save other documents in there, like any graphs or anything that I can produce or share with families. So those are your students. And then here you can see some previous data trackers that I have from the past years. This one right here that says data tracker 21 to 22, that's from last year. So make sure when you're going in to input your data that you're going into the correct folder here, because we don't want to be searching all around for them. So the 2022, 2023 Katie McShane data tracker. I'm going to open that up. And this is what your data tracker will look like, where you will input the date information from your DIBELS administration. My students are listed down here at the bottom. Right now it's all blank because I've not administered any assessments with them yet. But over the course of this school year, we'll add in these data points going forward. So here I would put my beginning of the year benchmark data. Notice the assessments running along this line at the top. I'm not going to administer all of those assessments for my students based on their grade. So my student here, Simon, is a 5th grader. I don't administer letter naming fluency, phoneme segmentation fluency, or word reading fluency with him. I'm just going to leave those blank. These documents are all the same for every reading aloud student. So just leave those blank. But if I did administer the beginning of the year benchmark for Simon, I would put that information up here at the top. So I would put the date, just making up a date here. Let's say that he read 54 correct letter sounds. Then here, let's say he read 23. 9/20. I'm going to put here his words read, oral reading fluency, words read correctly. Let's say Simon did really well and did 120, and he made 0 errors. And then his maze score, I would put his correct answered. So let's say he got 18 and he made 2 errors. So this is how you would input that data that you're taking just from your testing administration, plugging it directly into the system. And then Liz will go in here and use this data and put it into the formal DIBELS system. Okay. That is where you can find the data tracker. Now, I would like to go into the actual testing administration for the different subtests that you will be administering with your students. So I have a quick video from DIBELS that we're going to watch. It's about 6 minutes. Then I'm going to actually show you the testing materials. We're going to talk about the scoring and the administration of that. So we're going to watch this. This comes directly from, and hopefully everyone will be able to hear it. I did share with sound.
My name is Marissa Pilger-Sir, and I am a doctoral student in the school psychology program at the University of Oregon, and also a graduate employee at the Center on Teaching and Learning. DIBELS 8 subtests assess a range of reading skills, from letter name knowledge to reading comprehension. And there are 6 subtests total, so based on a student's grade level, they'll be administered between 2 and 4 subtests per benchmark administration period. The thing about DIBELS 8 measures is that they're timed, and so we consider students' efficiency as well as accuracy with reading skills. Most of our measures are individually administered and take 1 to 2 minutes per student, with the exception of MAZE, which is a group administered measure and takes about 5 minutes to administer. Letter naming fluency is a standardized, individually administered measure, and it's a little different from the other DIBELS 8 measures because it's not a measure of a basic early literacy skill. However, it provides a really great measure of risk and is actually really predictive of later reading achievement. In fact, it's the dominant predictor of student success for the fall of kindergarten. So for this measure, students are administered from the fall of kindergarten through the spring of first grade. And students are presented with a probe with 100 upper and lowercase letters that are arranged in a random order, and they're given 1 minute to name as many letters as they can. A score for this measure is determined by the number of letters that are named correctly within 1 minute. Phonemic segmentation fluency is a standardized, individually administered measure of phonological awareness, or the ability to manipulate sounds in words, and it's a great predictor of future reading achievement. This measure is administered from the fall of kindergarten through the spring of first grade, and it assesses students' ability to fluently segment 2 through 6 phoneme words into their individual phonemes or sounds. And it's a 1 minute measure in which the examiner orally presents a series of words and asks the student to verbally produce those individual phonemes for each word. So for example, if the word is sat, the student would say s, a, t. After each response, the examiner presents the next word. A score for this measure is determined based on the number of correct phonemes that the student produces within 1 minute. Nonsense word fluency is a standardized, individually administered measure of the alphabetic principle. And we say that this is a pure measure of students' decoding skills because it assesses a student's ability to apply their knowledge of letter-sound correspondences and their ability to blend sounds together to read words without tapping into other word reading skills. And that's because we're presenting them with nonsense words. This measure is really predictive of reading skills as well. It's administered from the fall of kindergarten through the spring of third grade. So for this measure, students are presented with randomly ordered nonsense words that correspond to different sound spelling patterns that are typically taught in each grade. And in previous DIBELS editions, forms included just VC and CVC words. So those are those 2 to 3 letter words with short vowel sounds, like the nonsense word hap. However, in DIBELS 8, forms introduce more complex sound spelling patterns, such as long vowel sounds, arc-controlled vowels, digraphs, vowel pairs, and even some multisyllabic words, with words increasing in complexity with each subsequent grade level. And the student is asked to verbally produce either the whole nonsense word or the individual letter sounds in that word. Students are given a minute to read or sound out as many of these nonsense words as they can, and the final score is determined based on the number of correct letter sounds that they read, as well as the number of correct nonsense words that they either read or recoded correctly as whole words within 1 minute. So word reading fluency is a measure that has not previously been assessed in DIBELS, and it's a measure of reading words out of context. So it's a standardized, individually administered measure of students' accuracy and fluency with reading sight words. So sight words are words that have either irregular pronunciations or common words with regular pronunciations. So for example, on our first grade measure, we have the word black. This is a word that the student has probably been exposed to, but may not have the decoding skills to be able to read. So that's what makes it a sight word. This measure is able to catch kids who might be at risk for reading difficulties that NWF doesn't necessarily catch. And it's administered from the fall of kindergarten through the spring of third grade. For this measure, students are presented with a page of words that are arranged in rows, and the administrator asks the student to read as many words as possible within 1 minute. A score on this measure is determined by the number of words that are read correctly within 1 minute. Oral reading fluency is a standardized, individually administered measure of students' accuracy and fluency with connected text. So this measure assesses a student's ability to read words in connected text and provides a great indicator of students' reading comprehension as well, with the idea that if a student is able to read fluently, they can devote attention to the meaning of the text. This measure is administered from the fall of first grade through the spring of 8th grade, so we now go up to middle school. And students for this measure read a passage aloud for 1 minute, and then their score is determined by the number of words they've read correctly within 1 minute and their accuracy percentage, which can be calculated through the DIBELS data system. MAIS is a standardized group-administered measure of reading comprehension that's administered from the fall of 2nd grade through the spring of 8th grade. And for this measure, students are given a passage that has every 7th word removed and replaced with 3 options, and the student needs to choose the best option of those 3. In 3rd through 8th grade, the first and last sentence are left intact, and in 2nd grade, the first 2 sentences and last sentence are left intact. Students' score on this measure is determined by the number of MAIS words that they've selected correctly, and this measure takes about 5 minutes to administer per classroom.
Right. All right. Thanks, everyone. So that was kind of a quick rundown through video of the different subtests they'll be asked to administer. Now I'd like to go into it a little bit more in depth of how to administer and how to score the various subtests. So first, I want to show that everybody has access to the administration and scoring guide, as well as some remote testing administration directions, which I think is very important because many of our tutors work with students virtually, and you'll likely be administering this virtually. I do it for many different students virtually. I find that most of my students do a really good job with it after the first couple administrations. The first time they're not quite sure exactly what they should be doing, but it gets easier and easier. And then you'll find them saying, oh, I know what we're doing, even though that the online administration might not be ideal for some of our more struggling students. But it's still a great way to kind of keep track of growth. So I also want to highlight that I am always referring to this scoring guide because sometimes students make errors and you're like not quite sure if what they just said was an error or not. And here in the scoring guide, it suggests some possible scenarios that might occur, and it will tell you how to score it appropriately. So even I've given this assessment hundreds of times now, and I always refer to this if I have any questions. So kind of go to the scoring guide first, and then if you still have questions, then you absolutely can reach out to me or Liz to get those answers. All right, so let's go back here. Now I want to talk to you about the materials that you will need to prepare to administer this assessment. So the student is going to need student materials. If you're working virtually, you can just pull that up right on your computer screen through screen share and your student can see them. If you're working in person, you'll just have to have that printed out ready to go for your student. Then this teacher will need a scoring booklet printed, a timer, and a pen or a pencil to do the scoring. I really recommend that you just spend time organizing the materials beforehand. So when you're ready to administer, it's not taking too much of your instructional time away. I always do this, try to do it in the beginning of my Wilson lesson. Maybe we don't get to part 9 that day, but it's okay because we're doing the other, we're doing the DIBELS administration that day. Not a big deal. All right, the first sub-test I want to talk to everyone about is letter naming fluency. So here, and earlier in the other one, we kind of briefly saw that, but letter naming fluency assesses a student's ability to identify individual letters and say their names. This is not necessarily a foundational literacy skill that it's measuring, but it gives us a good idea of a student's, it can even be suggested of like working memory, how well a student can rapidly recall letter names, and if they even know their letter names. This is administered in kindergarten and first grade. It is only benchmarked and not progress monitored. I think that's important to highlight that you're just going to give this 3 times a year. It's not as something that you would need to progress monitor around. So you would be timing a student for 1 minute. The student will say the name. If they get that letter incorrect, you're going to mark it with a slash. This is what the different materials look like. On the left-hand side, these are the teacher materials. Here's what they look like. All of the DIBELS have these little scripts up here at the top for you to read, which I think is really helpful in your administration. The students do not have anything. They're just series of letters. Okay, I'm going to share my second camera really quick. Yay, it worked. Okay, so here I have my DIBELS benchmark for grade 1 printed out. So for the beginning of the year. Here on this sheet right here, I'll go over this in a second, but let's look at letter naming fluency right here. So it's just what I just showed you here, the script, and as students would be saying the letter names here. If for some reason they say letter sounds, you would just simply prompt them to say, please tell me the letter name, not the sound. And then the student will start naming them. I find that once they kind of they can kind of pick up speed and fluency if they do know their letters here. For students that don't know their letters, this is very, very difficult for them to do. But they're going to go along, and if they get something incorrect, you're going to slash. You're going to slash. The last one that the student says, I always mark it with a little break here, and it tells me that was the last one that they did. So here I would calculate. I love that the DIBELS has the numbers on this side. So you don't have to count the letters. You can just do a little bit of math here. So this student would have attempted 19, but they got 2 incorrect. So their score would be 17. Down here at the bottom, you would write the number 17. And sometimes, like if I have to do more math, I might write 19 minus 2. And then I would just get 17. So that's how we score letter naming fluency. Then if I come back here, this is where I can organize all of my benchmark data. This isn't necessary for reading aloud, but if you want to do it for your own work, I think that's totally fine. So you can just print one of these benchmark guides for each of your students. So you can just have it and refer to if you need to, but you're going to be uploading all of that information to your data tracker. So it'll all be saved digitally. But here, I would put the date. I can't write upside down. I'll turn it around. I would put the date, and then under letter naming fluency, I'd write the number 17. So that's what it would look like for letter naming fluency once I scored it. All right, I'm going to switch back to my other one for the next subtest. Okay. All right. The next subtest that that can be administered is called phoneme segmentation fluency. And this is a brief measure of a student's phonemic awareness, and it measures the ability to segment spoken word into sounds. So a student would be dictated a real word and asked to segment the word into its sounds. So for example, if I dictated the word cat, the student would be asked to say k-a-t. Now here, we really need to listen carefully to the student's spoken word. For students, like so many of our students, struggle with phoneme segmentation. It's a part of their reading troubles. So it's very often students might go at, and I'll show you how we're going to score that as well. And here's where it gets very important to look into the scoring guide. It'll tell you what is an error, how do you score all the different things a student might do. They might insert a sound, omit a sound, flip a letter. There's a lot of possibilities that a student might have. So this is completed orally, and there's no student materials because you are just dictating words to students and they are segmenting them. It is administered in 1 minute. Students segment the word into individual sounds, and the instructor marks correct sounds and slashes incorrect sounds. Okay. This is what teacher materials look like. And I'm going to share my second screen. All right. This is a first grade, beginning of the year, phoneme segmentation teacher material. So here, I will say, I really believe that we need to administer with fidelity. In the prompt, it says that your example word is the word am. And I know every Wilson teacher is cringing a little because that is a glued sound. And we don't ask students to separate into individual sounds. So this is the only change that I make. I don't use my example word am, I say cat. And when I say k-a-t. So while fidelity is very important in that we follow the administration guidelines, I just think I don't ever ask my students to segment am. I try to make them not do that. So it's really the change that I make. So I think that that's totally okay. And that's what I do. Okay. So down here, the teacher will dictate the word for, and the student is asked to say or. The teacher, I just underline it when they get it correct, just like this. And then here, ear. Sometimes for older students that have really good sight memories, you'll see them almost picture the word in their mind, like the word for, and try to go So they're not thinking of the sound, they're thinking of the spelling of the word. And I think that's really suggestive that a student struggles with phonemic segmentation or phonemic awareness in general. If they can't, maybe they don't understand what the teacher is asking, or they just cannot segment and hear those individual sounds. Let's look at the word wave here. A student might go wave. So they just kind of onset and rhymed it. So that would be marked correct. Ave would be underlined and counted as one sound. So when scoring that, this right here gives them 2 correct points. This is when I say go to the scoring guide. Make sure your notation is very clear and that you understand it, so that when you go back and you're wondering, how many sounds should they get for this word, you can look in the scoring guide and it will tell you possible scenarios that a student might do. So here, instead of going the student said ave. They get 2 correct points for that when calculating the full score. So here, I'm just going to kind of score this up to the word Ave. So I would put a bracket for my last attempted word. They would get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 correct sounds. And then down here on, they did not segment. That's why I underlined it all together. They get 1 point on. And then ave, 2 points. So this would be 3. That's backwards because I'm writing upside down. And then I would tally that for a total correct of 8. All right. Now we're going to go, oops, sorry, everyone. All right, moving along to the next subtest is nonsense word fluency. So this I feel like is the most important for the work that we do, just because so many of our students struggle with basic basic phonics skills, that they really don't have the word attack skills necessary to read nonsense words. And it's really what we're teaching them in our Wilson lessons, is how to decode words and how to apply word attack skills to unknown words. Well, a nonsense word is perfect for that, because all nonsense words, they have to apply their phonics skills in order to read them accurately. That's why it's such a good assessment. Another reason why we ask all reading aloud students to be administered this test, regardless of their age. So nonsense word fluency measures a student's ability to decode individual phonemes and blend them together to read. When you do this assessment, you're going to come up with 2 scores. One is correct letter sounds, or CLS. And the second score is words read correctly, WRC. DIBELS has quite a few acronyms, so definitely get yourself familiar with the different acronyms as you're administering the assessment. All right, so this assessment is, we have benchmarks for kindergarten through 3rd grade, but all students will be administered without the benchmark score. So students, this is a 1-minute timed assessment. Students are asked to read nonsense words. The instructor will have to listen very carefully and look for if your student is reading fluently, reading the nonsense word fluently, or are they segmenting the word in order to read it just in general. And another thing to highlight, very important to refer to the scoring guidelines for this assessment, because what is an error and what is not an error is all spelled out in the scoring guide. I think I will show you what that will look like in the possible scenarios in a moment. So this is what the teacher materials look like. On the left-hand side, we have teacher materials and the scoring guide. I love how it breaks up and how it should be read, and it gives the instructor just really like a easy way to score and hear what your student should be saying. CLS stands for correct letter sounds. Notice in the first line, they have 15 possible correct letter sounds. And WRC, words read correctly, they get another score if they correctly read all of the letter sounds. And this is what student materials look like over here, just the nonsense words. I'm going to show you what the scoring guide looks like for this, because I do feel like it is very helpful. All right. So down here, it just gives your basic instructions, and these are linked. So if you're looking at it on a computer, you can just click on it. So nonsense word reading, it has the materials you'll need, administration guidelines, kind of what we're looking for. Let me zoom in a little bit. What we're looking for, what is correct and incorrect. Tells you more acceptable prompts, what you can do. Here we go. Situations. Here it tells you different things a student will do as they're completing it. So here, and kind of this is again where it gets very important that your notation is very clear to you as you're scoring it, because you're not going to be able to score it as the student is taking the test. This is something you might need to look at the end of your session to calculate their total score. So this is student, they went rab. So they get all points for correct letter sounds, and they get 1 point for word read correctly. In the DIBELS 8, they don't get any more points for fluently reading or automatically reading. They can segment the nonsense word and blend, and as long as they segment and blend it immediately after, they get, and if it's accurate, they get the points for that. So they can go, like in the second example, mot. But if they don't say mot after, they do not get a point for reading the whole word correctly. But they do get points for correct letter sounds. So here, going to the scoring guide is very key, very important. So if they just said and that was it, they just get 3 correct letter sounds, 0 points for words read correctly. Here's some other scenarios. So here the student said ab. They get a point for correct letter sounds for ab, but they get no point for blending the whole word correctly. Let's look down here. So here in this possible scenario, the student said a long A sound, abe. They do not get a point for correct letter sound for the long A sound. So they get 2 correct letter sounds for that word, 0 words read correctly. And there's other ones. We're not going to go through every possible one. These are sounds out of order. So mot read as mob. They would not get points for the T, but they would get points for saying M and O correctly. Inserted sounds. If they insert a sound, they get points for saying the correct letter sounds if the other ones were correct. They do not get points for whole words correct. Okay, different scenarios are controlled vowels. So here is they just kind of briefly go into some of the different scenarios that you might come across. I think listening with a really close ear to what your students say and getting your notation down properly is very key. And then also using your professional judgment. Did my student read that word correctly? Because this task is so difficult for our students, they are going to mumble. They're going to have difficulty with this task. So just encourage them, recognize that it is difficult for them, and hopefully we'll see their scores improve over time, even though this task is so hard for them. Okay. All right, just a couple more, everybody. We're doing a great job. And what's nice is not every student will be given every battery of this assessment. All right, the next subtest is word reading fluency. This measures a student's ability to read grade level sight words. They're using sight words here as like an ability to read something quickly and accurately, not necessarily like decodable or irregular. Because the word list that they do have includes both words like said and was, but also decodable words like we and black. More like grade level common words they're presenting. This is measured in kindergarten through 3rd grade, and it is just 1 minute timed. Here is what the teacher materials look like. So you will have the script up here at the top, and then this list of words in a random order. Students, they're allowed to segment them. So if they go the word work, work, that does count as correctly. We're going to see that their fluency is going to suffer very significantly with that if they're slowing down to segment those words. But remember, we're looking for progress over time. It's okay if they are unable to read some of these words. The first grade one starts with the word no during one of them, and I don't like that because they just instantly have to read the word no. But then you see student materials here are just lists of words that the student is asked to read. If they skip a line, they're all counted as errors, and that's throughout the whole assessment. If they skip a line, they're all considered errors. If a student loses their place, you can kind of redirect them where they should be. You know, definitely tells us that tracking might have some difficulty, especially if it's on the computer. Sometimes I'll use my mouse to kind of just point to where they are, give them a little support. All right, I'm going to not show you that assessment because on my other paper, just because of time. And I have 2 more subtests to look at. The next subtest that we have is oral reading fluency. And this measures a student's ability to read with speed, accuracy, and proper expression. It suggests in order to understand what we read, children must be able to read fluently, so they're able to access the material and it's more easily processed for them. Oral reading fluency has 2 scores. So words correct per minute, or WCPM or WCM, and accuracy rate. This is measured in 1st grade through 8th grade. And words correct looks at the total amount of words a student read accurately. And accuracy is a calculation that we need to do to tell us what percentage that they were reading correctly. You would get that score by finding the total words the student attempted, subtracting that from the words read correctly, and then timesing that by 100 to get the accuracy percentage or rate. I'll show you how to calculate that too. All right, let me show you what a student material will look like in teacher material. So here it has the script of what to say, and then it has the student, the passage the student will be asked to read out loud. It also on the right-hand side tells you how many words were in that line. So it really makes calculating what the total amount of words correct were. And then the student material just has a bunch of text on the page. Now I'm going to show you what that looks like on the teacher material, so we can take a look at that. All right, this is what a 1st grade beginning of the year text looks like. Now, some people familiar with 1st grade might have wide eyes. I know I did because this text is hard. But remember that, you know, this is designed for students who are achieving at grade level. So recognizing that this text would be very hard for students in 1st grade that we typically see. But we're looking at growth over time, not so much that the student can read this whole text accurately and beautifully. Because if they did, they likely wouldn't be working with their instructor. So this text is called Lucky Day. I would listen to my student read this and follow along with them. So if they're reading accurately, then I would just track along as they read. If they're making errors, I'm putting slashes on the words that they're making errors with. I also like to take, if I have time and able to, take some notes as well about how your student's doing. Good phrasing. Some students like troubles with names, only knowing simple sight words like was and on, right? All things like reading behaviors that you're noticing. If you have time, jot a little note down, just as like something to practice on, or just know about your student as they attempt this difficult task. So here I'm just going to kind of write some slashes on words. Oh, and if a student does not know a word here, you are going to give it to them. So if they're looking at the word Bobby here and they pause for more than 3 seconds, give them the word so that they can continue to read. And that's in the script up here at the top for when you're able to do that. So then I'm going to put a bracket for where my student stopped reading. So it was right here, 3rd line after the word snow. And if I calculate that, this line has 19, so this was 20. So my student attempted to read 20 words. So that's when I'm going to come down here. They attempted to read 20. Now, how many errors did they make? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 errors. You're going to need how many errors that they make for your notes. So then total words correct, 15. Now I want to calculate what my accuracy rate is for that. Now you're just going to tell us for like scoring purposes, like to Liz on your data tracker, how many words correct they read and what their total reading was. But for your own work, it's helpful to know. So on my calculator, I'm going to put 20 minus 15. Oh, I'm sorry. Is it? Oh, wait, no. Oh, I messed up. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. We should do 15 divided by 20. So the words read correct, divided by the total words read. And that's going to give us 75. And then I'm going to times that by 100. I'll change that on the PowerPoint. So my percentage rate would be 75%. So my student read this passage with 75% accuracy of the total words that they read. Sorry for that error, geez. So 75% accuracy. All right. Then last subtest we're going to talk about is the maze. This is a newer subtest, like that's in the 8th edition. And this is a standardized measure of reading comprehension. It says group administered because if you're working in a small group, you can give this to everybody because students can complete this independently. But most of our work is one-on-one. So this is measuring comprehension. It's also measured like semantics, right? It's a fill in the blank activity of what word would make sense in the sentence that they're reading. So every 7th word of the text is removed and replaced with 3 options. The student is asked to give the word that would make sense in the sentence. Some of the passages are very difficult for our early readers to read. So a 2nd grader that's struggling with reading is likely going to have an extremely difficult time with this task. Allow them to attempt it, even though I recognize, and we recognize at Reading Aloud, that some of the text will be written at a level that is harder for them, that they could read independently. But you'll see over time, they'll get more confident with it. So they'll be able to attempt this task and hopefully increase their accuracy as well. All right, I'm just going to quickly show you what that looks like. So here, this is what the teacher materials look like. It has the text and then these gray boxes, and it has the correct answer that the student should say. In the student materials, it has the same text with every 7th word replaced by 3 different options. And the student is asked to tell you what the word is there. Students are able to read this silently, and they get 3 minutes to complete this task. So it's a little longer. I know it's been some time and this is a lot of information, but I'm just going to quickly show you this last one of what it looks like. Okay. So this is what a student material might look like. They're going to read this text. When they get to the box, they're going to tell you the word that makes sense. If you're working in person, the student can circle the correct answer. If you're doing this virtually, I just ask students to tell me the word out loud. So I'll say, okay, read this to yourself. When you get to the gray box, tell me the word that would make sense in the sentence. And then they just tell it to me out loud, and I keep track on my teacher materials. And then the score here, it's calculated in an interesting way. So you would, when you're scoring this one, you would take their attempted. So my student attempted 3, and you would look at how many correct they got here. So care is correct. My is correct. He is not correct. So they would get 2 points for correct and 1 error. And 1 error. So that would actually give them a score of 1.5. Now they'll have like the grade level, like benchmark scores of what is anticipated that we can look at is the score around where they should be getting on this assessment. So you're going to look at how many correct they got and write down how many correct and then how many errors they had. So everyone, that is the end of all of the various subtests that you can administer and all of the guidelines for administration. So I want to open it up to questions now, and I appreciate everyone's time on a Monday evening. And if you don't have questions now, please email me. My email's on the screen now, and I'd be happy to follow up with you either via email or if you would like to just have a quick chat or something about the different guidelines for DIBELS administration. So I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you.
Katie, no questions, but thank you. Very thorough.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. Learned a lot. Thank you. It was really good.
Katie, I'll jump in. In case anyone has any questions, I don't want to stop anyone from asking them. But first of all, thank you everyone for being here. I know we ask a lot of you, but as Katie said, it's so important that we get this beginning of year and end of year data. We actually have some sort of statements that we can say about our students from last year, which I'll share with you shortly. But this data, I think it's so helpful for us to really do the best for our students, see who's making progress. If they're not making progress, we can figure out what we need to do differently. If they are, we know that we can keep doing what we're doing. So it's just so important. And, and also sort of selfishly, funders are really looking at our data. They want to know that what we're doing is working. So, but I know it's a lot to ask of you. And I really, really, really do appreciate your time in, today and all the time that you spend in making sure these get done. And Katie, thank you so much. I think this was super helpful. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Katie,
Good
do you have a
job.
question?
It's kind of just a practical question. So I am like old fashioned and I like paper and a physical piece of paper in front of me with the kid. Do you just make a copy if that's what you do? Do you just make a copy for every time? Because you still need kind of like I printed out these like big binders last year. Then do you just, make a copy so that you can do it? Yeah. Do you know what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, so because I work with a lot of students in person as well, I've made a DIBELS administration binder. So yeah, I think it would be helpful if you want to print out your beginning of the year benchmark teacher forms and and your student forms. If you want to make a copy of those, I think that would be helpful, and then something you can keep using year after year if you're servicing a lot of students. Does that answer your question, Katie?
No, but that's okay.
No.
So what I mean is, like, I did this, I just like barely used it last year. I'm so sorry. I will do better this year.
Okay.
But like my student like physically marked up my only copy of that maze
Of the
thing.
maze.
Yes. So that's more what I'm asking. Like when you need to go in person and they have to mark stuff up, do you just make copies and then you just have like one thing that you work from? That's more what I'm asking. Like a practice.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So
like doing so much work and like what's easy and practical? I guess that's what I'm asking with physical copies to mark up and stuff.
yeah, if your student is doing the maze in person and they're marking and circling, you'll absolutely have to have individual copies for each of them. Because they're going to be marking it up and then it will get all like kind of sloppy and stuff if they're like multiple kids are using them. Yeah. So if they're like writing on it for the maze specifically, because that's the only one that they'll be marking.
I think,
I have a question about one of my students who is a wonderful young man who's not young. He's an adult and he has no decoding issues at all. So we're working really on not even comprehension. He's bilingual and we're working on writing and expressing himself that way, reading something, expressing himself, writing an essay, and referring to text to prove his opinion.
That's excellent.
What kind of yeah, it's great, but what kind of an assessment? And I'm very familiar with testing. I do testing in New Jersey. I would like to use an assessment, but I'm concerned about, which one that reading aloud would be interested in him using and me assessing him with.
Yeah, Angela, jump in if you want to, but I would love to have those conversations because especially for our adult learners and we're just kind of getting into servicing more adults, we don't have assessments that are for them, or even our high schoolers. We don't have enough valuable assessments for them, especially to target the skills that you're talking about, like written expression. It's not as so like quantifiable as like the DIBELS is, basic phonics skills. It looks like Mary Lou suggested the QRI would be like the quantitative reading inventory, which I believe that's what that stands for.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's got all that in there. It's got questioning in it, comprehension, retelling, and that's pretty much leveled all the way up.
I think that this particular student could do that, certainly on a literal level. We're working on more inferential work, but he can do that. It's basically expressing himself in written language, writing an essay. I think he would like to go back to community college and have those skills, because I asked him, I said, why are you doing this? Why do you want to? What do you feel would be necessary for you in your life that the tutoring could handle? And mostly it's writing. So I think the comprehension piece is there. Certainly it could use some development, but the writing is very, very basic.
And I think there's some written expression, some newer ones, assessments that have come out. And I would love to sort of have a conversation with everybody, because I think we're really good at assessing our kids. It's the nonsense word fluency. Katie and I have this conversation all the time that really feels most valuable for our Wilson kids, because that you can really it really addresses what we're working on. The issue is, as we know, is that for our older, the issue really is for kids who are 4th grade and above, the nonsense word fluency isn't part of the DIBELS. So it's not,
And we're only measuring oral reading fluency, which we all know it's the last to develop, you know? So many of our students struggle with that. When we start to see gains in book 5, book 6 of Wilson, then we really start to see their oral reading fluency improve.
So, and then also, Ellen, for the students, you know, which are becoming more, you know, as we have older students and adults with different needs, is, you know, what's the best way to assess them? I can share some assessments that look at written expression, and you can tell me what you think. But I would love, and if everybody's thoughts on it, because you know, we do the Woodcock Reading Mastery, but and I think that's really helpful. Not necessarily for writing, but there's only a pre and a post for that. There's no progress monitoring. So I think we're looking for, you know, more norm referenced assessments that we can use.
Well, there's parts of the Woodcock, but it's sentence writing. And then the WIAT I have always found was a little bit too easy to give credit for what was written.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be great to find a really good writing assessment.
I think the Writing Revolution, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they have, I mean, they're more informal assessments, but I think those are quite helpful. I can send you some links to that, and also some other options as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Angela.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you all. All right. And if, you know, obviously, as Katie says, don't hesitate to reach out. You know, if you think of something afterwards, or when you're about to do the DIBELS and you're stuck, you know, don't hesitate to reach out.
Really quick, Katie put in the chat that, or I think it was Katie or it was Karen, but that can we create a yearly calendar document of general timelines of assessment? We definitely can get that too, but look for Liz's emails as well. She always gives like a 2-week buffer window and like reminders occasionally. So Liz is definitely really great at communicating when we expect that. I guess I just am hesitant to do like a calendar because we know that like dates can change, and like I don't want everyone to send like a hard and fast like calendar and then like that not come to fruition, or we're off by a week and it could get confusing. So I think coming from Liz, look for that. But Katie, we can absolutely communicate more long-term if that's what you're looking for too. We just might not be able to stick to those hard and fast dates as much if we're doing, you know, what's due in June.
We can definitely have, though, the beginning, middle, and end of year benchmark windows, which I think would be helpful, right? Okay. Okay.
Great, everyone. Well, thank you so much. If anyone has any other questions, please reach out to me or, you know, say it now.
Thanks.
All right. Good night, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you so much.
too.
Bye.
Katie, that was
Hi.
perfect. That was perfect.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah,
I'm so
really,
out of breath.
oh, stop. Let me just stop recording.